What would foreign nations do to Israel if they disobeyed? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Deuteronomy on Walking Through the Bible.
His word, the glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Deuteronomy 28. We're going to be reading from verses 36 to 46. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Deuteronomy 28, beginning of verse 36. The Lord will bring you and the king whom you set over you to a nation which neither you nor your fathers have known, and there you shall serve other gods, wood and stone. And you shall become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all the nations where the Lord will drive you. You shall carry much seed out to the field, but gather little in, for the locust shall consume it. You shall plant vineyards and tend them, but you shall neither drink of the wine nor gather of the grapes, for the worm shall eat them. You shall have olive trees throughout all your territory, but you shall not anoint yourself with the oil, for your olives shall drop off. You shall beget sons and daughters, but they shall not be yours, for they shall go into captivity. Locusts shall consume all your trees and the produce of your land. The alien who is among you shall rise higher and higher above you, and you shall come down lower and lower. He shall lend to you, but you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes which he commanded you. And they shall be upon you for a sign and a wonder, and on your descendants forever. In our last two lessons, we've been looking at the curses that God would send upon Israel if they disobeyed the law that he had given them. What we've witnessed is the terrible state that Israel would be in for disobedience. You would think that such calamities might convince the Israelites that it would be much better to obey God than disobey. And for the most part, the generation that heard Moses here did obey the word of the Lord. But the generations that came after weren't as attentive to the law. And because they allowed some of the peoples in Canaan to remain, those peoples enticed them with idolatry, which in turn brought upon Israel God's wrath. The curses we've seen thus far have not only been upon the body and the mind, but upon the land as well. This brings us to the third group of curses in this chapter. The diseases that we read about thus far would separate Israel from society and from the ability to approach the Lord at the tabernacle, for those contagious diseases would make one unclean. In this third group of curses, we find that Moses explains how not only would these curses separate them from society and from the service to God, Israel would further be separated from God and be brought under the dominion of strangers as a punishment for the rebellion and apostasy. This curse here is something that I believe would have been hard to hear for Israel, for at that moment in time they hadn't inherited Canaan, and yet you have God telling them here, if you disobey me, then I will take away the land that I am about to give you and take you off into captivity. There you would serve other gods, because that's what the nations you would serve did. If Israel did this, it doesn't say that God would approve of such in that situation. God is simply stating a truth, that he would know what would happen. And if Israel was taken into captivity, they would become a byword or a proverb of what would happen to the nation of God when God is displeased. In other words, they would be the object of derision and ridicule. Turning back to the punishment that would befall them in the land, though, we find that Israel would plant much seed in the field, but not gather any in, for the locust would consume it. The worms would eat of the fruit of the vineyards, and the olives produced in their olive trees would fall off, yielding no oil. Those who were not Israelites who dwelt in Canaan, God would raise up higher and higher, so that they would become dominant. The stranger would lend to Israel, but they wouldn't lend back, for they would have nothing with which to lend. How long would these curses last? Until Israel was destroyed. And how long would the threat of these curses for disobedience last? As long as the law of Moses stood, which is what is meant here by the word forever, as we've seen in other places in our Old Testament studies. Again, you would think that the threat of these curses would spur on Israel to follow God, but in the book of Judges, we'll find Israel in sin and God cursing them. We will find numerous times in the books of the kings that Israel would have evil kings, and God would curse them. And then, of course, Israel gets so bad that they would be taken off into Assyrian and Babylonian captivity. So as we can see, God meant what he said. Now, even when Israel went off into captivity, that didn't mean that God would simply forget about them. He would be looking for a faithful remnant through whom his promises of the Messiah would be fulfilled. We'll continue on with the curses, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion, Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 47 to 57, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.